But methane, black carbon, hydrofluorocarbons, you get 10 times the amount of carbon reduction in a quicker manner. That seems to be a smart investment. And the other thing I would do is really invest, whether it's cap and trade monies or other sources of revenue, existing housing and buildings that are in our state have to be upgraded and retrofitted. You talk about adaptation to a warming climate. Yes, the air conditioners, but lower income people, the three most expensive things they have is their rent. They're lucky to have an apartment. Their food and their utility bill. Their utility bills will go up. Everyone else's are going down because you can, through investment of energy efficiency and everything, keep your prices low. We really need to figure out how we go back and upgrade those existing apartments and small businesses, frankly, so that they can adapt to a warming climate. We had 3 weeks in a row, I don't live along the coast, 3 weeks in a row of over 100-degree weather, but the worst part was 75 to 78 degrees at night. It didn't cool down. Mm-hmm. Your apartment with your one window is not going to have any circulation. And then you've got blackouts on top of that, so you can't even get your ceiling fans going. So that's going to be our immediate problem. But also that super pollutants offers an opportunity maybe that gets a little pressure off some of the other policies while we really double down on that. We can't pass a bill in the legislature to crack down on leaking natural gas pipelines. Mark Leno and I tried that. Now, what's the politics of that? And that makes sense to me, but methane reduction and everything. So we have a lot of work to do, and welcome all hands on deck. So, Michael.
And I appreciate that. When Senator Pavley, authored AB 32, there was the cap and trade system, it not necessarily mandated in that statute, but certainly pointed at. That's in terms of things that are working well and things that we would hope others would follow, as a part of this California model. That's certainly something that we would love to see, more jurisdictions join with us in, because that creates a broader market, bigger impact, that has lots of benefits, to that, and encouraging others to do the same in a cost-effective way. It also helps spread that burden, I think, over a broader area and requirement, and then brings not California down to the level where everybody else is, or many other states and jurisdictions are, but helps bring them up to where California needs to be, which makes us more inviting to investment, for manufacturing and the actual production jobs. It helps address, the middle and low income, economic prospects in different parts of the state. We see in this area, in this region, there's certainly a lot of growth in the economy in terms of wage growth and everything. That's doing very well in the Bay Area, not so much in the Central Valley, not so much in the Inland Empire. So how do we get those opportunities there? The cap and trade revenue is a great source, as the Senator mentioned, for addressing some of these issues. We would love to see some of that investment also go, to the manufacturing side of things. And many people look at the manufacturing sector and they think of this as a bunch of, multinational, companies, huge corporate entities. But you also have to remember, they're large employers and they're large users of electricity and other sources of energy. If you can help make them more efficient, you can have significant impacts on the overall, efficiency of this state. So there's scale that goes along with that too.
Well, definitely greenhouse gas reduction funds go to business in terms of subsidies, helping them change over fleets of diesel trucks to something else, something more efficient and less polluting. So, maybe not specifically across the manufacturing sector, but that bright and shiny object of that $6 billion gets a lot of attention. I want to open this to questions, which we hope you have. Yeah, subsidy, okay. These are code words I shouldn't have used. Really would love to hear any questions that you all have, and we have that standard people with microphones, so just raise your hand and direct it to anyone if you have someone specifically. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Mary Selkirk with Citizens Climate Lobby, and Ms. Cart, you've written on the limitations and maybe the overselling of the state's cap and trade program. So I had a question for all the panelists, but I think specifically for Michael Shaw, that virtually every economist around the country and internationally believe that a simple, steadily rising price on carbon and a predictable price on carbon incents all of the companies that you represent to become more energy efficient and also to be able to transition off of carbon. So my question to you is, what's your association's position? I know you've been very supportive of the cap and trade program, but what's your position on establishing or supporting real carbon pricing that can be demonstrably effective, both nationally but also in California or the other way around? We know what we're facing nationally right now, which is a hostile environment toward emissions pricing, carbon pricing across state lines. But I'm very interested in what your association's position is on effective carbon pricing.
No, thanks for the question. And CMTA, the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, were not supportive of AB 32 or SB 32 for that matter when those bills were going through. So,
But you love them now.
well,
Give you
our attitude towards
if we give you allowances from cap and trade, you'll love it.
our attitude towards the cap and trade system did change significantly because SB 32 was in place. When we had a mandate in place to reduce 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, we had to think what's the most cost-effective way for us to meet that compliance obligation. And so the cap and trade system for us is that most cost-effective way, and we believe that that does get to legitimate and true carbon pricing because the market is involved in setting that price rather than a mandated price that would go up over time, which doesn't account for changes in the economy. One of the factors that I think we haven't addressed today, but has been reported on repeatedly, is a big part of our success has been the downturn in the economy that we experienced between 2008 and 2010. That was a significant reduction in emissions. So, in terms of carbon pricing, we think that a market-based system where ARB, as it currently is allocating a certain number of allowances to industry to help them, comply with that. But then businesses who are more efficient can sell their allowances, and businesses that are less efficient can buy allowances, or there are offsets available through that program, that gives multiple compliance options. So that gives us a better market signal as well as flexibility in meeting those obligations. And so we don't support a carbon tax because we believe that it's inflexible and doesn't allow for the compliance opportunities that exist under a cap and trade system. And that has a little bit more of a market touch to it.
Go ahead, John.
I have a different view on that subject. First of all, when we did AB 32 in 2006, cap and trade was simply a way to catch the remaining emission reductions that we didn't know where to get them from because
about 20%.
We had 33% RPS, we had million solar roofs, we had the Pavley vehicle standards. So the burden of cap and trade under the AB 32 was a smaller rule. What I'm concerned about is that in the future, ARB is placing more and more reliance on cap and trade and less reliance on direct emission reductions. And if we're going to get to these goals, I think we're going to have to not over-rely on the market incentive, because if you have too many allowances and the price is too low, then you don't get the reductions. And this is the experience that we've had in Europe, where the price didn't ever get high enough. And this is our experience in Reclaim in South Coast Air District. The tendency when you set up these market systems is you don't want the price to get too high, because then you have sticker shock. And so you create an abundance of credits to make compliance easier, but then that defers investment in the direct emission reduction. So I think we're going to have we're not going to do carbon tax in California because we've already done cap and trade. If we're starting over, I think cutting the payroll tax and increasing carbon tax might make sense. But we're too far down the road at this point, I think, to change. At the federal level, I think that's a different matter. I think there's a lot of people in your coalition that are working to move the dial in DC, and that this may be a strategy. But I think we have to keep in mind where the emission reductions need to come from. The refineries have opportunities to make significant reductions in emissions, but they're not going to make those reductions until they're either forced to or until the price of the allowances and such. But I think we have to sort of keep this part of what we need to do about recalibrating. If we're not getting the reductions, that we need to meet the target, then we need to adjust the supply of allowances.
That's interesting you should say that, because it's precisely what the legislature has asked the Air Board to revisit, and it has indicated it has no interest in revisiting that, and so we'll see how that goes. Who's next? Go ahead, excuse me.
I'm Barbara Lee. I'm the director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. My question has to do with how you're factoring costs when you talk about the cost of action versus the cost of inaction. DTSC, along with CalRecycle, is charged with recovery from the fires. We remove hazardous debris after the fires, and CalRecycle removes the rest of the debris before rebuilding can start. Just the cost of that work is large, but when you look at the cost that PG&E is facing now for some of the fires in Northern California and the action the legislature took related to that, I'm wondering if the calculation changes for how much climate change is costing. And I would be very interested in CMTA's position on how you distribute the costs of inaction effectively. And then I'd love to hear what Vijan or Senator Pavley would say in response to that.
Let me just inject something real quick, because I'm bossy, because I'm a reporter. But the state of California in 2030 estimates that the avoided social cost, which is a kind of a big bucket, that's $11 billion a year. So that's the cost of doing nothing. That's health and some environmental impact. So it's kind of significant.
Yeah.
Go ahead. For me, it would be. Yeah.
Well, it certainly is significant, and I appreciate the question. Certainly, what we're looking at, how the legislature has handled the fires, in 2017, ratepayers are going to be picking up that cost because, PG&E it's been determined that PG&E can't financially handle their responsibility in that area. So I have been known to refer to that as a bailout of PG&E, but more broadly, the utilities, have a responsibility to maintain their systems, and those costs are generally borne by ratepayers because of the fact that it is, involved in the infrastructure of delivering that electricity, and certainly makes sense that ratepayers would carry a significant part of that. However, when it comes to, the utilities' responsibility, some might say negligence or at least imprudence in not following the requirements of the law, that's a different story, and that's something that ratepayers should not be on the hook for. And that is, in terms of the cost of inaction, is something that, we need to take a look at more broadly as a state. And CMTA and a coalition of entities that actually proposed looking at a catastrophic claims fund that would help address those issues so that neither the ratepayers directly nor the individual victims affected by the fires would be the ones, facing those direct costs. Speaking more globally, California manufacturers do look at the cost of inaction as well as the cost of action, and that's when they are making those investment decisions, and they're looking at the cost of California, the environment changing, and how that affects their ability to recruit and retain employees in the state. They're also looking at the cost of action and how that affects that same equation, because we have lost companies because they decided it was too expensive to employ people here. They needed to go somewhere else to maintain that level of equality of employee. So there are certainly, issues that the regulatory agencies are going to have to grapple with. That's an appropriate role for the state to take on in addressing those issues, and the agencies are doing very good work. And ARB is certainly kind of the banner agency on a lot of this stuff, but CalRecycle, DTSC, the California Energy Commission, the PUC, and others, have a big role in that too. And we would hope that when they're considering the regulations and actions that they are going to take in achieving some of these policy goals, that they would also look at the impact on the economic side of things. California has a number of laws in place that require them to look at both sides of that equation, and we, certainly support those efforts to do that in a legitimate and defensible way.
Down back there.
I'd like to.
Excuse me, sorry, the fellow back there, and we'll get to you.
Yeah, I'm Ed Smeloff with Vote Solar. Governor Brown has attempted now over the last several legislative sessions to pass a law that will expand the regional wholesale electric market, make it more efficient, allow costs, result in lower costs for implementing carbon and climate change measures. I'd like to ask the panelists what their perspective is on where regionalization is going after Governor Brown leaves office.
This is the regional grid bill you're talking about?
Yes.
Who wants that?
I'll just start with it, but I think especially B. John White probably has a little more background than I do on it. I followed it closely. It was globally, great idea, renewable energy. We can sell our 100% cross state lines. Right now, it's expensive to just give it away during peak times. Energy storage is key to that solution and everything. The challenge that many people had in that is, I guess, the concern about the timing and the makeup of the association with coal-producing states like Wyoming and everything. And there's a different argument to be had, but is this the correct time, given the Trump administration? Is FERC totally independent? There's a lot of people on FERC I admire, but it just seems that a lot of people were just hesitant. And we have sometimes a difficult time to control our own destiny. And after a deregulation crisis that I went through that I'm still recovering from on energy, was this the time? So I followed it from afar. I wasn't in the trenches in the Capitol on this. I think it's coming. I think it was just about when.
Well, my constituency was divided on this question, and I had some of my colleagues and organizations were strongly supportive of doing this now. I think the political challenge is that to create the full integrated regional grid, California has to give up the governance of the CALISO board. And when you're inviting the legislature to pass a bill to repeal their authority to confirm appointees to a board that has this much consequence,
Yeah.
it's a hard ask. I also think that my hope is in the aftermath here. First of all, we have a new governor coming and a legislature that I think is going to engage on this subject. But I think there's much we can do in the near term incrementally to expand regional cooperation, to expand the potential for day-ahead markets. I think we've got to recognize that for a regional grid to be successful, people have to collaborate, they have to trust each other, they have to, and to me that begins not just with the other states, but within California. The two strongest opponents of the legislation, in addition to some of those people that were more extreme in their views, were the municipal utilities and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And these agencies are really important partners for CALISO. So to me, we have to better integrate within California. We have what's called an energy imbalance market that allows real-time trading to fill in gaps. I think when we move to a more advanced form, I do think, as Fran said, it's a matter of timing, but it also is a matter that all the other states don't have to pass a bill to repeal the legislature and the governor's authority to make and confirm appointees, and that just makes it hard.
And we did not take a position on the regionalization proposal that had been put forward this year, but I would agree. I think it makes imminent sense, it's a great deal of sense to do that. I saw some nodding heads and wide eyes over here from our remaining legislators when the prospect of giving up the authority to confirm appointees was brought up by John here. So I understand that that there is that. But what we have been talking about today, what kind of the theme this week of the conference is, it's global. I mean, we need to be looking at bigger than just California, and that is part where the grid regionalization makes sense. Being able to do that being able to share that energy in a more cost-effective way is a critical element of that. And Senator Pavley mentioned that giving it away to other states. The situation's worse than that. There are points in the year, increasingly so, where we're not just giving it away, we're paying other states to take our electricity. It's called negative pricing.
Or curtailing.
or curtailing, but we have negative pricing occurring, which means we're paying Arizona or Nevada or some other state to take our electricity, which we paid for as ratepayers. And that, to me, is offensive, that we would do something like that. The energy imbalance market is a key part of that, and CalISO, I think, has done an admirable job in expanding that in spite of this resistance to a broader regionalization. But even within the energy imbalance market, there are transaction costs that occur between when you pass between independent authorities there. So if we can eliminate some of that, that helps make that more efficient, more cost-effective process too. So, you know, whereas I have members as well, I think who are a little bit split on that. As an organization, we're, you know, principally behind the idea of regionalization as a way to help address that broader issue.
Yeah, super complicated topic requiring, as John says, cooperation and agreement, and you can see why that's a problem, and trust. It doesn't happen.
Julie, your next person was David Freeman over here, and I have, because you had asked him.
Sure.
I'd like to see.
This has
David
been a very
used to be
fascinating
LADWP.
discussion of California energy policy as exists, but I want to bring us back to the question of the hour, which is and should California be a model for the world on climate policy? And I respectfully suggest that we have not debated the fundamental question yet. Is the climate challenge something that we must respond to, or is it an issue where granting incentives and market mechanisms and kind of hoping that maybe we will respond? In other words, is this the equivalent of something we need to mandate, like putting seat belts in a car? Or is it a subject that we can make speeches about and claim we're good guys because we believe the scientists, but then not even propose a set of legislation that will make it happen? You know, the function of government is to do the things that we can't do individually, and mandates are an accepted reason why we have a government. If there was ever an issue where if I drive an electric car and you don't, we both are in trouble, this is that issue. And so until California can claim the mantle of leading the world on climate policy, I think it needs to demonstrate that it is capable of enacting laws on the totality of the greenhouse gases comparable to what we're doing on the electric power side. And that debate, I don't think, has taken place, and I don't think California is quite there. But I think it's probably closer to being there than anyone else, and that's why I applaud California's leadership in the world and lament it as well, because it has so little competition. But I would like the panel to discuss the fundamental question: is California capable of doing what the climatologists say, passing laws that will get us started, not in 45 or 40 or not some distant date, but today, to start actually reducing total greenhouse gases 4% a year, which they say we must do starting now to get down to zero in order to avoid the catastrophes. And also, the debate of the past, I think, has to be forgotten. It's a new world. The renewable revolution has taken place. It is real, and climate change should not be spoken again. The words are climate damage. The damage is occurring today. And so the debate needs to change into a debate about the reality. And I would hope that California will aspire to provide the kind of leadership the world needs. But let's get on with that debate.
The questioner used to run the LA Department of Water and Power. So there's a tension between lofty aspirations and what can happen in the real world, what we're willing to accept in terms of lifestyle, and it's a bit more than lifestyle. It's, can I drive my car? Do I have the right to freely drive my car? Where may I live? These are serious things that very difficult for legislators to tell people what to do. Nobody likes that. I wouldn't. Right, Fran? So what more can California do? Is it command and control? Is it messaging from the governor, the existential threat we've heard so much about, and in his really apocalyptic pronouncements, which are quite true, but it's really in your face. We're all going to die. And is that appealing to people? Is that the way you make policy? How does it happen?
Well, first of all, as I've been thinking about this panel and listening to discussion, a couple things have struck me. Is first of all, how much worse it's gotten than we thought it was, how much sooner.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that we have 2 years in a row with the worst wildfires that we've ever had and exhausted the resources of the firefighting agencies before the year is over is a sign that the urgency is upon us. I also think that we have everybody's attention, but at the same time, politics is what it is. We have an initiative on the ballot to repeal the gas tax, okay? And the polls say it may pass. And I think that could have a chilling effect on the appetite for more aggressive action. So I think what we have to do, I mean, I think about it, we've had great success, much has been accomplished, costs are less, but we're still behind. And so I don't have a sense of self-congratulation. I have a sense that we got a lot of work to do. And it's got to be interactive and iterative. We can't just say, here's the target, go do it. We got to have pathways and see, well, okay, what are the different options and what are the different ways, combinations of incentives, mandates, markets. But I'm just struck by how big the challenge is, and as much as we've done, we're still short. So I don't know that we're a model. I think that we are a laboratory. And in some ways, we're learning from our experience, and some things have gone better, faster, cheaper than expected. Some things have been sort of beyond our grasp. So I think it means that this is I agree with the governor, that this is the central challenge of our time. I feel that my generation is leaving behind, despite great efforts, a very, very dire situation. And so I have a sense of urgency, a sense of not quite panic, but a sense, this summer, I think for me, combined with the kids at the border, has just made this crazy. It just seems like we are spinning out of control. And yet, if we panic or if we lash out, or, that's not going to get it done either. So I think we just got to keep at it with a greater sense of urgency, but also with recognizing the need for innovation and the need for adaptation, both with regard to the environment as well as adapting our policies to our experience and to the current challenge.
Brianna?
I don't ever disagree with
Why would you?
Mr. S.
Yeah,
David
no,
Freeman. So he's right, and only him can tell you like it is. I think most people are trying to do their very best in a very challenging system. So every time I keep thinking our most successful was the renewable portfolio standards. Target signals expanding when allowed, technologies catching up. You knew it was ratcheting down. Other things, we have some trajectory of reductions at time, maybe not enforceable. We have to figure out how we can do more and get the support of local governments too. It's just not the state. That's part of the challenge. There's local land use decisions, and the list goes on and on, that need the attention of this partnership we have in all this together. So short term, because I think it's near term, because as John said, and I agree, I've never seen climate like we've had. I chaired the water committee the last 8 years. The drought, wrote the Sustainable Groundwater Management Plan. We're the last state to manage our groundwater. 125 basins severely overdrafted, and they're pumping more with no hope for more snowpack. So the sustainability issues around the state and all this directly related to climate change, this is not the debate anymore. It's not about whether there's climate change. This is just a fundamental debate on regulations versus free market. That's where the party differential is, right? Will the free market system adjust itself to respond to these challenges? Or do we have a sense of urgency where we need a regulatory approach? And what's that middle ground? Very, very difficult. We need a national policy, you know. I'm dedicating myself the next few years working with other subnationals in other states, like regional low-carbon fuels and everything else. So in the short term, what I would say is, boy, scaling up energy storage, absolutely. We can't get to 100% renewable without scaling up energy storage. Attacking super pollutants, which we get more bang for our buck and reductions in a shorter period of time if we have a sense of urgency, and then helping lower income communities, frankly, in the adaptation and also investment in jobs and multi-benefits of air pollution and health impacts. We have a lot of work at hand, and so it takes legislator agencies, but it's not just Sacramento. When in our state have we just relied on government? It's that sort of the grassroots too that needs to really engage in this and make it a priority with your elected officials, but your city councils particularly, and in your own personal lifestyle choices.
Michael has something.
Oh, sorry, Michael.
And I appreciate, I mean, I think that's one of the, I think as Julie mentioned at the opening, one of the things we really appreciate, I personally really appreciate about the questions to come is it's what everybody really wants to hear and talk about. Appreciate the call to kind of get back to the central question as well. I think part of the challenge is, I don't know that the political will is there to do what you know, many have said needs to be done. And frankly, I think it's a challenge to the legislators, you know, and I'll say this knowing I have to go back and talk with them in December and January, you know, to be honest with Californians, you know, that this is what needs to be done and here's what it's going to cost to the best that we have knowledge. I think a lot of what we've attempted to do has been tried to put it behind the scenes so that people aren't aware, they don't really notice. And that's one of the biggest challenges. You're not going to change behavior that way, you know, so you need to be specific. There was an attempt to put, I think one bill, I can't remember the author at this point in time, but, you know, to put a carbon price, you know, related to cap and trade or the low carbon fuel standard on the pump at the gasoline, you know, when you at the gas station. You know, we've got the sales, federal excise, states excise, sales taxes, et cetera, kind of listed on there in a sticker. If anybody bothers to look closely, you'll see it probably next to the Prop 65 warning that you never notice anymore too. But, you know, on there, putting something on there saying that this is the cost of carbon, you know, reduction compliance, you know, programs here. You know, that bill didn't get passed because nobody wanted the public to know that we're actually, this costs money. They wanted to think that it's being done seamlessly and behind the scenes. And really that's where then it falls on industry to be the compliance mechanism for doing that. And I don't think that that's fair or honest, you know, with the public on that. So, you know, my apologies to the folks I have to come back and talk to, you know, in a couple of months or a few months here. But, you know, I think that's a challenge for everybody to consider. And it's not popular by any stretch. So I in not being the one who has to make that decision to push a red or a green button ultimately, you know, I have that luxury to do that. But I think that, you know, from an industry's perspective, you know, there is, you know, a very real, you know, challenge that they're going to make decisions on where to locate, you know, their facilities and where to do their production and where to employ people and to create the economic benefits based on where it is most cost effective for them to get a return. They're not going to make decisions to locate in California if they feel that it is a disincentive to do it here. And I think what we're really unlikely to see, because there are constitutional issues around this, is a limitation on what you can and can't buy based on where it was produced and the associated carbon, you know, impact with it. So, you know, there are tariff issues and, you know, there's that little commerce clause probably that gets involved there too.
Interstate Commerce Clause, that one?
Small issue. But, you know, so that's where, you know, a broader consensus, some type of national program would certainly have a much bigger impact and, you know, tying everything together. Will we get that with the current administration? Not likely to happen. But, you know, California can help set a better example. We've had conversations with some of our colleagues from other states, Oregon in particular, that are looking at this going, should we do this cap and trade thing? And we're saying, well, if you have a mandate, you know, a goal, yeah, you should do it. It's the most cost-effective way to do it. So hopefully we get some greater participation maybe that's where our more likely scenarios are, is building those coalitions with the states that, Senator Pavley and Governor Brown have been very focused on with subnational, and cities and other entities, that can, are more likely to get on board than our current federal administration would be to do so. But we do have hope, and we certainly think that California has taken some positive steps, and that if we go back and recalibrate, as John said, on some of these programs that we have in place, that we can make some progress towards that without, negatively impacting our economy in the process and advantaging investments in other states.
Yeah. When it comes to getting people together and an agreement, I always wonder why enlightened self-interest isn't more of a motivating factor. Here's why it's good for you and good for me, but, so on that side. Excuse me, yes.
Yeah, hi. I represent the North Coast, so you all know who I am. Senator Pavley, you talked about super pollutants, I guess is the word you used. So we have had some pretty catastrophic wildfires, beginning actually in 2013, with all due respect, Mr. White. And the amount of carbon that is released because of these catastrophic wildfires compared to the amount of carbon that we save for all the programs that I am hugely supportive of is a vast difference. And so we were able, we'll see if the governor actually signs this, to get money for vegetation management. So when you talk about the small investment reaping huge benefits, the ability to sequester more carbon in the redwoods where I represent by better land management practices could be hugely significant for us. When you talk about environmental justice, and it isn't just an issue for people in the Central Valley and Southern California, a report today that just came out, I saw that was referenced on KQED, the amount of deaths we will potentially experience from smoke inhalation and the damage will go from 15,000 to 40,000 a year because of these smoke there. So I hope that over time, and it has been difficult to get people to invest in the resources to actually do some of these vegetation management programs. I hope that as we retool our climate approaches, that we consider that as well. It's not just my district, Senator Jackson's district, Brian Dolly, who represents the eastern part of California. It's a huge problem, not just in California, but in the West. Mm-hmm. So that's more of a commentary than anything else. But the social justice issues are not just in the bad air areas. We have it in really short, focused amount of times. In parts of my district, we've had hugely poor air quality since the latter part of July, and we're breathing that constantly. So that's not a question, but I did have a question, really quick. Really quick. Mr. Shaw, you talked about the increasing cost of business. I own my own business for 30 years, so I know that the little things matter. From a manufacturing and technology perspective, is there an industry standard on how much percent as a percentage of overall expenses is the energy part of this as a line item? And you may not have the answer, but I know that in most businesses, the actual biggest cost of business is employees and not some of these other things. So I'm curious, is there an industry standard around that? Obviously, it varies based on the kinds of activities, but where is that number roughly?
So I think you kind of answered your own question there, which I appreciate. The answer is it depends. I mean, it depends on the type of activity you're involved in. If you are doing, manufacturing, baskets or clothing, I mean, there's probably less energy intensive. If you're manufacturing, cement, or steel, or computer, components, I mean, so that a lot of that's more energy intensive. Food producers, generally very energy intensive process. So, there are varying degrees of that in terms of that. I don't have an industry standard number if I took an average across all industries, because then I have to weight, the different aspects and complex or makeup of California industry. So I don't have a number for you on that. But the answer is it depends. For some sectors, I can say though that it is more significant than the labor costs associated with the activity. In many cases, that's the situation for manufacturing. If you're looking at a restaurant, or I know you, as you know, running a dental office, probably, you know, the labor costs are significantly higher in that respect. But I think in the manufacturing side, generally speaking, energy is a more significant component. Inputs, you know, to the business, the raw materials, and labor, you know, are generally, I think, the top three, you know, parts of that.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you.
Another senator.
Yes, I'm Senator Jackson. I represent Santa Barbara County and Western Ventura County in the state Senate, and had the delightful honor and privilege to work with Senator Pavley, and I see Mr. Shaw frequently appears to oppose my legislation. And John White sometimes shows up to be the white knight in shining armor, or the knight in shining armor on his white horse. I think back to my very favorite book, The Lorax, and the fact that when we look to the private sector, because the private sector doesn't want us regulating the private sector, but the private sector's bottom line is money. And the whole issue about saving the planet is really about extinction. And the two are not necessarily the same. In fact, rarely are they the same. We talk about the need to get the market to respond, and yet the market looks at the last quarter's profits, and its executives and CEOs and all are dependent upon that last quarter's profitability for their future. How do we mesh the two so that the private sector starts taking some responsibility for the climate change issues, for the pollutants that it allows in the atmosphere, so that when we as the government try to put the kibosh on some of that behavior, we get told that we should let the market determine what's going to happen. The market is not interested in the survival of the planet. It is, by very nature of the capitalist system, interested in money and profit. Do you have some suggestions? Does anybody have some suggestions on how we can merge those two so that we don't have to try to keep regulating you, and you don't have to try to keep objecting to the regulation saying that the market is going to prevail, because we know it hasn't? Or we know that the environment has not prevailed, that the market, particularly now with this administration in Washington, is just basically pulling all the stops off of everything we've tried to do to protect the planet.
I have a humorous response, Senator Jackson.
I'll be the judge of that.
How about if there were more women on the board of the,
I love that.
I thought that was a setup.
Would you do me a favor and tell the governor that?
I'd like to give an example of where I think there is some synergy between the private sector and some of what we're doing, and that's in the case of the auto industry. The Trump administration is seeking to repeal everything that Fran and I worked on with her bill, and then the Obama administration built upon to create petroleum reduction goals that would have achieved the output of 8 refineries going away. And that's what's at stake in those regulations. But interestingly enough, despite the trade association lobbying, we've had conversation with individual manufacturers, including Ford and Honda, not me personally, but colleagues of mine and others, BMW, who don't want that fight, who basically see California's standards as, and the federal ones that accompany it, as doable and workable and disruptive to their future plans if those standards go away. Now, not all the manufacturers agree with that, but I think we're starting to see some leverage being created. I think Southern California Edison is another example where they see the future of electrification as more sales and more ability to do things. So I think there is some common ground here, particularly because in the auto sector, California is reliable as a partner for most of the manufacturers. There's disagreements, there's details that people want to negotiate and argue about, but the overall direction and the direction of the technology are moving in the right direction. So I think there's an opportunity, particularly if we can hold some of those folks with us, either informally or formally, to create a different dynamic than industry and Trump are against California, because I think the auto industry has too much at stake because they are investing billions of dollars in these new technologies and they need us to help them sell the cars. And even though it was slow starting, the global sales of EVs are expanding rapidly, okay? And that means that the direction for them is in that direction, and therefore I think there is some alignment. It's not always the case. I do think part of what we have to do is sort of call upon the private sector to step up and do more, but I